Now that version 3.0 has been out for some time, the player base has spared no effort in exploring how Dendro and his reactions would shake up Genshin's gameplay. As expected, the advent of Bloom and Quicken has been a sight for sore eyes with some characters and elements as a whole. And with Dendro's Archon Nahida finally gracing us with her adorable presence, I figured now would be a good time as any to finally get around to making this video. I was planning on releasing a piece evaluating Dendro as an element and his characters, but I wanted to hold off on it so as not to jump to conclusions too early. Although some of you may argue this is still quite early given there's only 4 Dendro units in the game. Regardless, today's episode will be reviewing Dendro's characters, reactions, functions, talking about the positive effects it had on the game's combat, as well as some criticisms on what it could have done better. Bear in mind, this is mostly opinion-based, not meant to be factual. You're welcome to agree or disagree with me as you please. Like its peers, Dendro was an element that corresponded with some aspect of real life, in this case being nature, so trees, grass, plants, and whatnot, seeing as Dendro is the prefix that relates to trees. True to its nature, no pun intended, Dendro serves as a facilitating element, whereby whatever element it interacts with will transform and amplify its effects. Because of this, its 2 premier reactions, Quicken and Bloom, are part of the transformative archetype, and it very heavily depends on executing those reactions for the bulk of its pressure, much like how Anemo depends on Swirl to achieve the most results in combat. One main difference that separates Dendro from that of Anemo is the focus. Part of what makes Anemo the most powerful element in the game is how little presence it actually occupies. All it does is catalyze Pyro, Hydro, Electro, or Cryo by simulating them and distributing their pressure across a wider area or at a higher frequency, usually alongside the original elemental attacks. Dendro also has varying effects based on what it's paired with, but not only is resulting damage Dendro based for 3 of its 4 reactions, but the onus is placed on consistently applying Dendro to the targets in question, and that's what the first wave of Dendro units were attempting to accomplish. To start, let's go through the 4 Dendro units available to us. Technically, at the time of writing this, Nahida has yet to be released, but we do have a special program as a point of reference. That and, dubious ways a handful of players collect information ahead of time. I deny any association with them and their means. The reason I want to briefly touch on the pool of Dendro characters is to set up the next part of the video. Dendro Traveler, aka DMC, is first, and in typical Traveler fashion, their skill set is meant to introduce you to their corresponding elements theme and playstyle, just like how Anemo Traveler helps you understand Swirl, Geo Traveler teaches you about Geo constructs, and Electro Traveler is a decent battery. DMC is probably the most practical of the 4 Travelers in regards to how efficiently they perform what you would expect from their element. Razor Grass Blade is a blast of Dendro in front of you, very similar to Kai's elemental skill. On a moderate cooldown, it has one simple purpose: apply Dendro to nearby targets. Sturgeon Manifestation follows this trend by instantiating an object that deals Dendro damage over time to all enemies within the circle. Interacting with the object can add supplementary effects to it. The premise is simple: DMC's goal is to apply Dendro easily and consistently so you can make use of Bloom and Quicken. Kale is up next, sharing the same theme of applying Dendro. Floral Brush is a boomerang attack that deals Dendro damage to all targets struck on the way out and once more on the way back, while Trump Card Kitty creates a small field that deals Dendro damage in an area, just like DMC, only more concentrated. Not gonna lie, Kale and DMC feel somewhat redundant. I understand they're not one-to-one if we nitpick the small details, but functionally their purpose is the same. Both are meant to introduce you to Dendro and its properties by offering simple yet serviceable ways to apply Dendro. From what I've heard though, Dendro Traveler edges out in value due to being less tight on execution and is overall ever so slightly more effective. One thing Kale does have over DMC however is that her burst is a 15-second cooldown versus their 20, which can help out with faster team rotations. Dendro's first 5-star Tignari gives off the impression of Dendro application, only with more damage packed into it. Vijnana Follow Mine, again I apologize if that's not how you pronounce it, is a blast of Dendro damage that empowers his next 3 auto attacks to charge level 2, almost like Ganyu's Frost Lake arrows, except more precise. This property implicitly makes him an on-field DPS, seeing as you need to use charge shots. Fashioner's Tanglevine Shaft is a simple nuke, an initial blast of Dendro followed by Seeking Missiles that do more Dendro damage. Where Kale and DMC are considered support units, on account of prioritizing the application of Dendro especially while off-field, their damage isn't a priority, and that's a good thing. Once again, Quicken and Bloom are transformative reactions, meaning the only thing you have to do is apply Dendro and that's it. As an on-field DPS, Tignari faces a curious problem, one that, while not exactly his fault, slightly holds him back from being better than he is right now. In contrast to an element like Cryo, Dendro is meant to enable damage, not deal damage in isolation. Mind you, it does craploads of damage, but only through reactions, not by itself, and its initial wave of units were likely designed with that in mind. To better explain what I mean by damage in isolation, let's look at Shal. Shal diverges from normal expectations of Anemo in that he doesn't really care about Swirl all too much, nor is he designed to achieve Swirl easily. His power stems from the sheer damage he dishes out through plunging attacks, rendering his Anemo affinity in name only. It doesn't necessarily work against him, but Anemo and its units weren't meant to deal raw damage in the same way that cryo, geo, or physical units do. It would have probably been more practical for Shao if he was a different element, one that could serve his purpose a bit more. Tignati faces a similar issue. His kit has a lot of damage output and he's very consistent, having a 40 cost 12 second cooldown burst that lines up with his 12 second cooldown skill. But Dendro's reactions aren't very conducive towards that kind of playstyle, especially since Quicken's Dendro sub-reaction spread deals flat damage, not amplifying his own. As you can see, DMC, Kale, and Tignati all more or less have the same function, apply Dendro damage and subsequently the Dendro status to enable Quicken and/or Bloom. Nahida also shares the motif of applying Dendro to as many enemies as possible as frequently as possible, solidifying the element's focal point being rapid persistent application, reminiscent of Cryo and Freeze to an extent. Her elemental skill damages all nearby enemies and marks them with the Seed of Skanda. Triggering an elemental reaction on anyone affected by this mark detonates it for more Dendro damage. This means you can maintain Dendro status on your targets for an extended period of time, so it works well for either Quicken or Bloom. Her elemental burst projects a massive area around her that has different effects based on what element your other 3 party members are, empowering Nahida's elemental skill to deal more damage and apply more often, and that ultimately results in more consistent Dendro application. Seeing as Dendro is fundamentally centered around transformative reactions, being able to apply it in rapid succession works to the element's advantage, since your goal is quantity over quality. More Dendro means more damage. Those of you who tried to push Quicken and Bloom to their absolute limit know exactly how much damage we can get. So at this point, we've all bore witness to what Dendro is capable of. Its power can rival that of currently popular team compositions like Taser, Soup, Chain Freeze, and National. So as far as balancing the element to be useful, miHoYo succeeded. But there's one question with the element that doesn't seem to have an answer yet, not one in the immediate future at least. I'm aware it's only been 2.5 months since version 3, and a lot of this may come off as premature, but now that Nahida has officially been brought into the picture, she solidifies Dendro as an element and playstyle. Just like how the Traveler serves as an introductory experience to the corresponding element, the Archons epitomize it. I'm not saying they're the strongest character for their elements, I doubt anyone would argue Venti beats Kazuha, but they're supposed to represent the essence of their element. That's where I find my main criticism about Dendro so far. All 4 of its cast members were ostensibly designed to apply Dendro/Dendro damage and not much else. Granted, it's a very damage-centric element as opposed to Cryo having utility reactions like Freeze and Superconduct, but Dendro's capabilities at this moment are very limited in scope. It doesn't appear to have a theme outside of its reactions, and that's a bit concerning. I know I'm about to get a ton of comments from people going, well actually, by saying this, but when we boil down what DMC, Kale, Tignati, and Nahida do, they all sort of do the same thing. Deal Dendro damage, more specifically apply Dendro, making the element feel somewhat monotonous. Even back in version 1 where the other 6 elements had only a few characters, there was still an attempt to create subclasses or side roles. For example, there were 3 Hydro units at the start of the game, Barbara, Xingqiu, and Mona. On top of facilitating Hydro, they each had a dedicated purpose. Xingqiu was a Hydro buffer, providing things like super armor, damage reduction, and follow-up Hydro damage to name a few. Mona was a Hydro booster, massively increasing the strength of Vaporize and giving her a reputation for being the game's first damage per screenshot character. Barbara was a Hydro healer, foregoing offense to supply her team with a healthy amount of sustain. At max constellation, she could even revive a fallen teammate. Hydro's roster would continue to expand its niche, bringing us our first on-field damage dealer in the form of Child and then a reactor support through Kokomi. On top of working towards Vaporize, Electrocharge, and Freeze, the characters were known for their individual strengths. Right now, it feels like all attention is on Dendro's reactions, stripping its roster of their individuality. Not a bad thing per se, half of what keeps Pyro alive are Vaporize and Mel. Hu Tao and Xiangling would be worthless without them, but even so, the other 6 elements characters are known for more than just their reactions. Point being, Dendro has no subclasses or subroles. We have no Dendro healer, Dendro tank, Dendro crowd controller, Dendro booster, Dendro shielder, even though Anemo and Dendro shields don't exist. Stuff like that. Yes, Kale, Tignati, DMC, and Nahida apply Dendro in their own ways, but that's all they do. One could argue that Tignati's elemental skill taunting enemies could be seen as Dendro control, or DMC's elemental mastery buff serving as a Dendro booster, but that's not their focus. Jin's focus is on healing. Kazuha's focus is on sheer damage amplification. Venti's focus is on crowd control, Sayu's focus is on mobility. Obviously all of them can trigger Swirl, that's what they're supposed to do, but that's not what makes them them. As it stands, Dendro's characters are missing their own identities. Tignati and Nahida are both on-field DPS. Kale and DMC are practically identical off-field DPS with slight nuances in their gameplay. I feel like miHoYo prioritized things backwards. Instead of creating a character with their own individual purpose and then figuring out how they contribute towards Dendro's reactions, they started by figuring out how they contribute towards Dendro's reactions and then how to do so differently from their peers. There's enough variance in how they apply Dendro to where we know how effective Dendro's reactions can be, but not enough variance in how adaptable it is. Since our current sources of Dendro application have nothing else with them, that means your Hydro, Electro, and/or Pyro units have to be the one to supply things like crowd control, shields, healing, and defense. Though fortunately, because Dendro has the potential to deal so much damage, that gives you the luxury to try out characters who weren't as popular before. Prior to 3.0, Shinobu's issue wasn't that she was weak, it's that in any situation where you needed Electro, she was never the best choice. Electro was almost exclusively damage, so your best options were Shogun, Beidou, and Fischl. However, with Dendro's reactions providing all the damage, you can slide in more utility, and that's where Shinobu's healing is very much appreciated. In other words, it's a glass half empty or half full kind of situation. On one hand, the advent of Dendro was an indirect buff to characters who didn't conform to their element status quo, opening up possibilities for team building beyond how much damage a character does. But on the other hand, since Dendro's own units don't have the other ancillary stuff like defense, shields, heals, control, buffing, etc., that forces you to search elsewhere for them, which may restrict your freedom of choice in party development. This is made even more constraining when we account for how Dendro-related characters pressure you into using very specific elements. Nilo, for instance, despite being a Hydro character, requires you to have a team of only Dendro and Hydro characters. Nahida, despite not obligating you in a yes or no way like Nilo, implicitly encourages you to comprise a team of her, a Hydro, Pyro, and Electro character. That doesn't give you very many options, and it locks you out of using Animo or Cryo units. That is, unless you're okay with not getting the full range of benefits from Illusory Heart. I think MiHoYo purposefully limited what each Dendro character can do. In the beginning, they weren't fully aware of how broken it would be if a character like Shinso had super armor, damage reduction, healing, follow-up Hydro damage, and the benefits of Hydro's reactions. Likewise, they thought it would be too overpowered if Chi-Chi's elemental skill generated energy because of how much restoration she had. Now that we've had 2 years and change, MiHoYo has a better idea of what will turn out OP and what won't. So they likely took a more conservative approach to Dendro to gauge how prevalent its reactions would be before pulling the trigger on making characters who could do more than just apply Dendro. Even so, they were probably too conservative. There's not enough coverage for an educated guess on how strong Dendro really is because we don't have a lot of characters, and the few that we do have are too similar to each other. No disrespect to Kale fans, but I stared at DMC and Kale's kits for like an hour and I thought to myself, there's no significant difference between the two. If your end goal is to pull off a Dendro party, they're effectively the same in function. That being said, Dendro itself was a very positive addition to the game. While I hold my stance that they could have been more creative with the first wave of units, the element only added new stuff to the game, not changed or nerfed any existing stuff. I know I use words like forcing or requiring, but that's only if you're adamant about pursuing a Dendro comp. If you don't care to go that route, traditional team comps are still as effective as ever. Characters who were strong before are still strong now. It's not like Raiden National isn't good anymore or Chain Freeze stopped working. Dendro simply presented an alternative approach, enabling a lot of new teams that feature characters who struggled to find a place in the meta before. Toma got a nice little buff from Burgeon. Shinobu, Kuting, Miko, and Beidou were made considerably stronger in their own ways thanks to Aggravate and Hyper Bloom. No one was nerfed, only buffed. So in the grand scheme of things, Dendro changed the game for the better. It's missing a lot of aspects that would help us understand it more, but as of right now, I would say the element has integrated itself nicely with the other 6 elements. I hope in the future we'll be able to expand more on the roster. One that would be really nice is a Dendro healer, especially with how Bloom Cores can damage players too. If they insist on maintaining the notion of having characters belonging to a specific element in your party, we definitely need more support and utility in Dendro's roster. Actually, next week I'll be making a video on exclusive supports to go further in depth on that, so stay tuned. All in all, I am pleased that Dendro has managed to even the playing field. I know Electro is gradually catching up to Pyro thanks to Taser, but Quicken finally puts Electro in a carry position, which is what I and I'm sure many of you Electro fans wanted. I'm glad that MiHoYo is making a concerted effort to balance things out. And it is nice that they buffed some of the older characters. They just need to flesh out the roster a bit more and we'll be good to go. Let me know your own thoughts on Dendro so far, if you think the element was handled well or if you think it was poorly designed. Feel free to share in the comments. For now, if you enjoyed the video, it would be awesome if you left a like and subscribe. Consider following me on Twitter at Vars, joining my Discord server, and if you'd like to support me further, check out my Patreon. By donating, you get access to benefits for all 3 of my channels, Vars, Vars 2, and Vars 3. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.